Let's all open our Bibles to Daniel chapter number 5. We're backtracking a little bit in the chapter sequence of this book because the book is arranged in two separate sections. Chapters 1 through 6 are events that involve Daniel, and he interprets a couple of dreams in these chapters. From chapter 7 onward, we have the record of dreams and visions that Daniel himself had. So we've already done a couple of those visions, and now we're going to go back and finish the more historical section of Daniel. So chapter number 5 is going to take place in 539 BC. How do we know that? Because it takes place at the time that Babylon City fell to the army of the Medes and the Persians. And we know that that took place in the summer of 539 BC. We even have some specific dates assigned to it from the Chronicle of Nabonidus. Now, Nabonidus was the actual king of Babylon at this time, but he spent most of his time away from the capital city and left his son Belshazzar, the prince, as the second ruler of the kingdom. And that's going to be important to the story today, so keep that in mind. When the Medes and the Persians marched on Babylon City in this particular year and surrounded it, Belshazzar felt that his walls were impregnable, that there was no way in the world that the Medes and the Persians were going to be able to take this grand city. Now, he's wrong. They're actually going to send in a strike force at night through one of the water gates and kill the night watch and open the gates up, and the Medo-Persian Empire is going to take over the entire city as the beginning of their absorption of the entire empire. But Belshazzar decides to throw a party as part of his way of showing he didn't believe that the Medes and the Persians could be able to break through his defenses. And so that's where this story begins. Daniel chapter 5, verse number 1. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords and drank wine in front of the 1,000. So this is his way of saying, no big deal, we're fine, our defenses will hold even against that force that's camped outside. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Now, Nebuchadnezzar is Belshazzar's grandfather. His mom is Nebuchadnezzar's daughter, who married Nabonidus, Belshazzar's dad, and he became king. That is, Nabonidus became king after he put down some attempts to usurp the throne within the family after the time of Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar, at the beginning of his kingdom, had made Jerusalem tributary to the Babylonian Empire. This was the time when Daniel was taken into exile at the very beginning of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So we're actually in the 49th year of Jerusalem's desolation, that is, its destruction under King Nebuchadnezzar, but we are 67 years past the time that Nebuchadnezzar took the golden and silver vessels out of the temple at Jerusalem and took the young men like Daniel into exile to show effectively that his God is bigger than the Jewish God, and that the the empire of Babylon was stronger than the small kingdom of the Judeans. So those gold and silver goblets, drink offering cups are what they are, have been sitting in the temple of probably Nabu or Marduk, one of the gods of the Babylonians, for almost 70 years now. And Belshazzar gets it in his head that one of the best ways to show how much he doesn't care about the Medo-Persian Empire is to bring some of the tableware of the various gods and goddesses that the Babylonian Empire has conquered and make it part of their dinner party, make it part of their drinking feast. And of course, these goblets belonging to He Who Is were brought in. So they brought in the golden vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So they're toasting all the gods and the goddesses of their pantheon, and also probably the gods and goddesses who have been absorbed under the empire of first Nebuchadnezzar and then the later Babylonian kings, such as this second ruler of the kingdom, Belshazzar. And then the great famous event happens. Verse 5, immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. So a lampstand is arranged in order to throw light in front of it. And so just opposite one of these lampstands, on the wall right there, where the king can see it, there is suddenly the appearance of a disembodied hand. I don't know whether it was glowing. I don't know if it was oversized, but just the fact that it is a detached human hand writing on the wall would have been enough. The king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's color changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. Now, that's all a description of extreme fear. We've got a drop in blood pressure, which makes him very pale and makes him weak. And he has involuntary muscle contractions in his legs so that his knees are moving back and forth rapidly and knocking each other. And this is when the king decides he needs to know what the message is that's left by the hand, because he can't read it. It's not in his language. So the king called loudly to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans. Chaldeans is the name of the most ancient core of the Babylonian peoples, from a rare place upriver from Babylon city, much closer to the area of Haran, where Abraham was. That's where Chaldea is located. And so it's an honorary title kind of given to some of these hereditary advisors to the king. So we've got the enchanters, the Chaldeans, the astrologers. These are people that know the ancient writings. They are the ones that know the spirit world. They know the wisdom of the regions of the empire and beyond. So certainly they should have the database in their own experience to read the writing on the wall. The king declared to the wise men of Babylon, "Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple." Purple is a sign of royalty, of high honor in society. "And to have a gold chain around his neck." Gold is one of the most precious metals on earth, and so it's symbol again of honor and respect. "And," listen to this, shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Now, this is really interesting to us as a proof that this is not a made-up story. This is something from the time period that knows the intricacies of the culture and the situation. As I already told you in the introduction today, Belshazzar is the second ruler of the kingdom of Babylon, because his father, Nabonidus, is still alive as the first ruler of the Babylonian Empire. So Belshazzar cannot offer any higher rank than number 3, which is what he does. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or make known to the king the interpretation. So it's outside of their knowledge base. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed, and his color changed, and his lords were perplexed. So now that he can't get the information even from the wisest of his people, he is in a major quandary. And begins to panic even more. Now, verse 10. The queen, and the queen here is actually his mom, the queen mother of him, the wife of his father, Nabonidus, that's out traveling elsewhere, who's out doing things elsewhere in the empire. So the queen mother is actually the daughter of the late Nebuchadnezzar. The queen, because of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banqueting hall, and the queen declared, O king, live forever. Let not your thoughts alarm you, or your color change. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. Now, this is the way that Daniel has been referred to multiple times in the text of the book of Daniel. It's the perspective of the Babylonians, that he has contact in the spirit world, in the divine world. She continues, in the days of your father, and she's not talking about Nabonidus, she's talking about Grandpa, Nebuchadnezzar, her dad. In the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father, your grandfather, the king, made him chief of the Magi, the magicians, not sleight of hand artists, but people who were tapped into the spirit world. That Daniel, in the 3rd year of King Nebuchadnezzar, had become one of the junior members of the Magi. But that's when Nebuchadnezzar had his dream of the 4-metaled statue, the image that he couldn't figure out and his people couldn't figure out. And Daniel came in and did it, and that's how Daniel was immediately promoted, as young as he was, to become the head of all of the advisors to King Nebuchadnezzar. So he made him chief of the magicians, the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. So all the people that Belshazzar has just called in, he was in charge of at one point. He doesn't seem to be in charge of them anymore. It seems as if once Nebuchadnezzar passed from the scene at his death, that Daniel was moved out of that leadership position, replaced. There was a little bit of turmoil, as I said, during those years after Nebuchadnezzar's death. So somewhere he gets shifted into a lower rank in the kingdom work. So that's why Belshazzar doesn't know anything about him. But Mom is telling him, because of an excellent spirit, knowledge, and understanding to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. So the reason that your grandfather, my dad, put him in such a high position is because he knew how to sort out puzzles exactly like this. He had an inside track in the spirit world. Now let Daniel be called, and he will show the interpretation. So you call Daniel, and he'll sort this out for you, son. Verse 13. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king answered and said to Daniel, You are that Daniel, one of the exiles of Judah, whom the king, my father, brought from Judah. So you're one of the ones from Judah that my grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, brought here 67 years ago. Isn't that correct? I have heard of you, from Mom, obviously, the Spirit of gods is in you, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. So you can hear this man is speaking from the idea of multiple gods, pantheism, polytheism. So he is acknowledging you're tapped in to the place where the gods are. I need your help. Now, the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me to read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the matter. But I have heard that you can give interpretations and solve problems. Now, if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed in purple and have a gold chain around your neck and shall be third ruler in the kingdom. So he offers to Daniel exactly what he'd offered to everybody else earlier that same evening. Daniel answered, said before the king, Let your gifts be for yourself and give your rewards to another. So you can keep your purple, you can keep your gold, you can keep your highfalutin rank structure. Daniel already knows, I think, that the Babylonian Empire is going to end before tomorrow. And so this guy won't have any power anymore. He won't even be alive. So Daniel continues, Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. So yes, I'll give you what you want to know. Now this thing that Daniel's going to do isn't going to do anything for Belshazzar. He's going to be dead, like I said, by tomorrow. What it will do is set a clear example in front of all of the leadership structure of the Babylonian Empire that's gathered in this banquet hall right now. Which means when those guys are debriefed, some of them before they're executed, but others before they are maybe taken off to captivity somewhere else, or maybe they're placed in lower ranks of authority. These guys are going to know beyond a shadow of a doubt, Daniel gave the clear message of what's about to happen this evening. So keep that in mind. O king, the Most High God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship and greatness and glory and majesty. So he doesn't want to talk about multiple gods. He wants to talk about the one God, the Most High God, he who is. And he who is the one that gave Nebuchadnezzar the kingdom. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed. Whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up. And whom he would, he humbled. So Nebuchadnezzar had all power. He was the King of Kings, which is a Mesopotamian title of this time period. And he was the Lord of Lords. But, listen to this. When his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne and his glory was taken from him. So Daniel is now going back over some of Nebuchadnezzar's history, particularly his craziness, his madness that took place for a period of either 7 weeks or 7 months. And I want you to pay attention to our symbolism that we've talked about before for the country of Babylon. Do you remember? It was a winged lion that was then plucked of its wings and forced to stand upright like a man, and it made boasts like a man. It was lifted up to be boastful. And so here we actually see the language of being lifted up. That is, Nebuchadnezzar's heart being lifted up, being full of itself, full of himself. And because of his pride, God took him down a notch or two. And because of that, we remember earlier in the book of Daniel that Nebuchadnezzar repented and even gave a dramatic decree talking about how great the God of the Jews was and that he needed to be respected. Well, apparently, grandson didn't learn anything from that story, if he ever heard it. But here's the rest of the story, verse 21. He was driven from among the children of mankind. His mind was made like a mind of a beast. His dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind and sets over it whom he will. So Nebuchadnezzar had to learn the reality: God chooses who's in control. He either specifically puts people in control, or he permissively allows people to rise to power. And so that's going to be important for what's happening right this moment, in this place. The transition between the kingdom of Babylon and the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians is happening right now. And God is the one that is permitting it. Verse 22, and you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew this. But you've lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and your lords, your wives, your concubines have drunk wine from them. You've praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, stone, which don't see or hear or know, but the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you've not honored. So you've dissed God, the real God. Verse 24, then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And I can almost see Daniel, who's in his 70s, clearly. Might even be by now in his 80s, I think. He's probably gesturing to the marking on the wall. And then he says, this is the writing that was inscribed. He can actually read it. Now, it would appear that it is inscribed in the ancient Hebrew lettering. And when I say ancient, I'm talking about going back to the time of Moses or slightly before. And it's not apparently a script that the Chaldeans knew. Even Hebrews, hardly any of them would have recognized lettering from this time period, back in the time period of Moses or slightly before. But the language, once you understand the lettering, is Hebrew. Mene, tekel, and parsons. This is the interpretation of the matter. And so now that he's read it to him, he now interprets it. Mene, which has the idea of numbered. Mene actually is the word for numbering. God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. So your kingdom has been numbered, and it's finished. The time is up. Tekel. Tekel is the word for weighed. You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Now, back at this time, before coins, a lot of the merchandising took place through weight, these balance scales of knowing exactly how much metal had to be given of a specific type of metal in order to purchase an item. So here, he's being valued. He's being weighed, and he is not of the value that he needs to be. He doesn't meet the standard, is what God is saying. And then finally, the verse 28 says, Peres, your kingdom is divided. And the word Peres is the idea of division. But there's a little double entendre that's happening here, a little double meaning, because the word here, Peres, also stands in for the word Persian. And so your kingdom is Peres, it's divided, and it's given to the Medes and the Peres, the Persians. And then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed with purple, a chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. So you got to give Belshazzar credit. He followed through with what he promised, even though it was a bad message. He did what he said he would do for Daniel. Now, the rest of the story is pretty simple. Verse 30, that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. As already said, strike force comes in under the water gates. They open the doors to the different gates. The army pours in. Belshazzar is tracked down. He is executed. And then the leader of the Medo-Persian Empire, Darius the Mede, he received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Now, we'll talk more about him tomorrow when we come back. But Darius was the general in charge of this army. And so he is going to be promised leadership of the new Babylonian portion of the Medo-Persian Empire.